You're giving single ladies.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Autosport here at the Hard Rock Stadium in the paddock. It's me, Mark Mann-Bryans, joined by Emily Selleck. We've just watched, well, quite an interesting Miami Grand Prix, Emily, I think we'd say. Let's start with McLaren, another 1-2, another dominating performance for championship leader, a runaway championship leader now, Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, who would have thought? I think at the start of the season we were saying, Lando, it could be his year. And here Oscar is just cool, calm and collected, absolutely sailed to victory and he's extended his championship lead to 16 points now.
It's very impressive at the start as well, because obviously we had an issue with Verstappen and Norris, but Piastri just has that momentum at the moment where everything seems to go his way, doesn't he? And he drifted around that and he dispatched Verstappen so quickly. Obviously he's a much quicker car, Verstappen is a lot slower, but he had no qualms about just putting it in, getting the job done, whereas then we saw Lando Norris really make a big meal out of getting past him, didn't we?
Yeah, it's starting to feel a little bit like, Piastri's a little bit inevitable in the way that Verstappen for a long time, it felt like any obstacle you threw at him, he'd overcome it. That's a little bit how I feel about Oscar these days. He can overtake Max, it's no issue. Lando, on the other hand, seems to be...
Yeah, it's good facial expression, that summed it up. That facial expression really summed it up. With Lando, it's a bit damned if you do, damned if you don't. That's certainly how he feels. He was talking afterwards about how, people always criticise him if he tries to overtake and maybe has a crash. They then criticise him for maybe being too conservative and not getting past. And the issue he had was, while he's wrestling with Max, Piastri's almost 10 seconds up the road, and with these cars, with the overtaking here, with the fact they're the two quickest on the grid, he was never going to close that gap. So the race was almost won for Oscar in that he got past Max a lot quicker than Lando.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think we can overblow it and say, Lando is really, really struggling, because that's definitely, not the case. And these two cars are, a lot quicker than the rest of the field. I think at one point they were 30 seconds plus ahead of George in P3. So, I guess we'll see if this is, just a little hiccup for Lando, or if he's going to, see how the rest of the season shakes out.
Yeah, we had Lando being a bit downbeat, I guess, when we had Oscar dancing on the grid, didn't we? So that maybe sums up how they're both feeling in the championship at the moment.
Yeah, hitting the gritty, but he's told us it's not going to happen again. It was a one and done kind of thing.
Do you want to do it now?
No.
Right, Emily, we've relocated to Ferrari. Probably the story of the day, actually, wasn't it? They're fighting over the minor points positions, which is where they won't want to be. But we heard some fantastic team radio from Lewis Hamilton when he was asking to get let by. What a story that is.
Yeah, very spicy it seemed like on our end watching the race. He was, making these comments saying just go have a cup of tea while you're at it, take your time. And then interestingly, it took a while for him to come to the pen after the race, seemingly maybe debriefing with the team. And by the time he came and spoke to us, he was super calm, really downplayed it, said that he was being sarcastic and that it wasn't a big deal. And he said way worse to Bono. So he's definitely trying to... Is toe the party line too much to say in this case, but definitely spicy.
Yeah, it didn't feel at the time that there was any kind of jokiness about what he was saying. He brought up races where he'd let Charles through already in China. Like you said, talking about, shall we have a cup of tea? Once the decision's been made, instead of saying thank you and getting on with it, he literally said, why don't you go make a cup of tea and make the decision? Then obviously he was asked to give the place back because he hadn't made enough progress towards Kimi Antonelli. So Charles Leclerc gets that place back. I'll try not to get run over. And the issue then, he came over the radio again and says, Carlos Sainz 1.7 behind me, do I need to let him past? It was all very, speaking about it now, it sounds like he was making jokes, but actually when you listen to the radio, it was almost full of quite, I don't want to say malice, but he was clearly angry under the helmet, wasn't he?
Yeah, look, from our end, it definitely seemed like they were coming from anger, but he was totally adamant in the pen after the race that it wasn't anger. He was just saying, I don't want to apologise for still being a fighter, essentially, and that he still wants to win. He wants the team to be totally on board with him, and he just felt as though they were kind of sitting back and taking their time when he wanted some action a bit quicker than it was happening from the Ferrari guys.
It's a good point when you think the triple header he had, he was really downbeat, he was struggling with the car, but he's come here and he finished third in the sprint race. Okay, then qualified 12th, but you say those kind of messages, he's a man who still wants to win, who's still got that drive to actually want to stay in the car, want to do well. He's not just here for a paycheck, clearly. It's interesting, you spoke to Lewis, we also heard from Charles Leclerc, and he said, look, I've not got an issue with Lewis Hamilton, I'd be exactly the same. If I was in his position, I'd have been asking for the switch. He was more upset about how it came about, that they had to wait and it wasn't clear what the structure was going to be. But essentially at the end of the day, Fred Vasseur spoke as well, and he said, look, away from the car, when we all got out and we all spoke about it, it was a much calmer conversation. He said, look, we didn't make an error. It's the team policy, we're only employing the team policy. Storm in a teacup maybe, which should bring it back to talking about tea. But yeah, I think it's not good when you're airing your dirty laundry in public, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you spoke to some other people up and down the grid. Was it Mercedes who had something to say about the decision to switch Hamilton and Leclerc?
Yeah, so they just thought, I think Toto Wolff essentially said, look, we'll never know if they'd have caught Kimi Antonelli, but did they miss the chance to try it, essentially? And we will never know, but Hamilton was quicker. I think we have to say that. He was quicker. The issue they also have is he quicker because he's in the DRS, or is he genuinely quicker with pace? That's quite a hard thing to work out in a split second when you've got to make that decision. So it'd be interesting to see all the team bosses. If you're not in that boat, you're going to have your opinion. But Fred Vasseur stuck blinded by what he said. He said, look, I made the call. It took me 1 and a bit laps. He also made the point, which I think is worth pointing out, when we hear those radio messages, they are delayed. So that isn't instantly happening. So again, whereas it might look more drawn out, he claims that everything was done at a pace that he was happy with. Ferrari were really upset about those minor points tussles they were having, but one thing that will worry them but really please Williams is that the Williams boys of Albon and Sainz really almost had the Ferrari's numbers there, didn't they? Alex Albon finishing 5th, and Sainz got caught up in that battle a bit between Hamilton and Leclerc, and nearly then got Hamilton at the end. So it's a great weekend for them. Again, another double points finish.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought Carlos Sainz would be leaving Ferrari and going to a bit of an upgrade at Williams? I mean, it was a fantastic weekend for both of them. I think, they've both been really optimistic across the weekend about how the car's developing. They think that they'll have some really great upgrades coming over the next few races, I believe. But they were both quite upbeat after the race. Alex said to us, the car feels really good. They feel like they can push, even further. It's all sounding really positive.
I do wonder if at some point this season they might, with a bit of weather or when something goes wrong, they're there or thereabouts to pick up those podium places, aren't they? If something goes amiss and there's a crash at the first corner, they're starting to show now that they could be that best of the rest in the midfield, for sure, aren't they? And that is such a tight battle, but actually they are pulling a little bit away from it now.
Yeah, I feel like it's normally Mercedes that we see. George, I feel like, is always kind of best of the rest and is always there, scrapping for points. And now we're starting to see Williams up there with them too.
George Russell, another podium for him today. After what he said was his worst ever performance in qualifying in this current car. Started 5th, got past his teammate Kimi Antonelli, and then almost was just, again, we mentioned it there, best of the rest. 30 odd seconds behind Lando Norris by the end. But he will feel he maximised his weekend, won't he?
Yeah, it was a real up and down, weekend for George. He obviously had his teammate Kimi with that phenomenal performance in the sprint. Was not happy with his qualifying, but ended up on the podium here. He said that he was happy with the car, but throughout the weekend we kind of saw sort of ebbs and flows in how he was feeling and his performance.
We know this guy's the McLaren that is just the pick of the field at the moment, isn't it? It's in a league of its own almost. So the best Russell can do, I guess, is that pick up those third places when he can, make the most of if there's an issue at the front. And at the moment he's doing that job, him and Max of course, but those two are doing that job. They're keeping the McLarens honest a bit, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, look, 30 seconds behind the leaders is he's nowhere close to them, but he's definitely keeping them as honest as can be.
Well, this is going to be fun. Thank you everyone for joining us on Autosport this weekend, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks for coverage of the race in Imola. Thank you again for watching over the weekend. Remember to check in over the course of the next few days for all the follow-ups and all the fallout from the Miami Grand Prix 2025.